My wife thought she had outsmarted me by deceiving me, but she was completely wrong. Let me start from the beginning. It started, as most betrayals do, with something seemingly innocent. We'd just gotten back from a long weekend in Lake Tahoe. Our attempt at recharging, Emily had said. A little escape from our hectic lives, the kind that was supposed to bring us closer. She picked the Airbnb, packed the wine, even brought along the old card game we used to play before life got complicated. It felt like progress. But looking back now, I wonder if that trip was more about easing her guilt than reconnecting. The following Thursday, an invitation arrived in our email. Colin Morrison, my manager at the firm, was throwing a summer soiree at his home in Mill Valley. It was a big deal. Colin didn't host often, and when he did, it was the kind of event that carried professional weight. Attendance was unspokenly expected, especially for someone like me who'd spent the last 3 years building a reputation as a dependable team player. Emily saw the email before I did. "Oh look," she said that night over dinner, tapping her phone. "Colin's throwing one of his rich guy backyard parties again. You gonna go?" I looked up from my plate. "You mean we?" She hesitated. "I figured you'd want to use it as a networking thing. You know how those parties go, talking shop with your coworkers. Half the wives barely know each other." Something in her tone made me pause, but I brushed it off. "You've always come before." "Yeah, but I thought I'd maybe skip this one. Let you enjoy yourself without having to worry if I'm bored." Her smile was too quick, too polished. That was the first red flag. 2 nights later, I overheard her on the phone in the upstairs bathroom. She thought I was asleep. The door was cracked just enough for sound to slip through, and I recognized the voice on the other end immediately. "Collins. You sure he doesn't suspect anything?" he asked. "No," Emily whispered. "He's still trying." That's the worst part. I don't remember how long I stood there before quietly backing away. I didn't confront her. Not yet. That's not who I am. I've always believed in gathering the full picture before taking a swing. That patience has served me well in life, and it would serve me now. By Monday, I had a plan. I waited until Tuesday afternoon to RSVP, making sure to forward the invite to someone else before I did. Sarah Morrison, Colin's wife. We'd spoken briefly at the company holiday party last December, chatted about work-life balance and our mutual love for old movies. She'd struck me as sharp, kind, and deeply unaware of the man she was married to. I wrote a brief message, including only what mattered. "You don't know me well, Sarah, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. Your husband and my wife are having an affair. If you'd like confirmation, I have it. If you'd like to join me at the upcoming party they're both attending, I believe it will speak for itself." She replied 6 hours later. "Let's talk." Over coffee the next morning, I showed Sarah everything. Texts, timestamps, pictures taken from just outside our home during the nights I said I'd be working late. She never cried, not even once. She just sat still, breathing through her nose, her fingers clenched around the ceramic cup like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why show me this now?" "Because I think they're getting careless," I said. "And I don't want you to find out the way I did." She nodded slowly. Then she smiled, tight-lipped, calm, deadly. "Then let's make sure they remember this night for the rest of their lives." We planned it carefully. The party was set for the following Saturday. Colin's house sat up in the hills, all glass and stone, with one of those open-concept layouts made for showing off. The guest list included company executives, clients, and just enough mutual acquaintances that neither Colin nor Emily would expect anything unusual. The aftermath was quiet at first. People stood frozen in the living room, wine glasses in hand, unsure whether to retreat or stay and witness the drama unfold. You could feel it, like everyone was holding their breath, unsure of their role now that the script had flipped. Emily and Colin both stood at the center of that wreckage, mouths half open, searching for some angle, some way to salvage dignity from a moment that had publicly stripped them bare. But there was no salvaging it. I wasn't going to yell. That would have made this a spectacle, and I had no interest in that. This wasn't about putting on a show. It was about closing a chapter in the most honest way possible. "You could have told me," I said to Emily, keeping my voice low but firm. "You could have come to me and said it was over. I would have hated it, sure, but at least it would have been real." "I didn't plan for this," she said, tears finally surfacing. "It just happened." "That's the most tired excuse in the book," Sarah cut in, her eyes on Colin. You don't trip and fall into someone's marriage. You make choices, repeatedly, in secret, and you build something on a foundation of lies. Colin finally found his voice. Sarah, I never meant to hurt you. But you did, she said. And you did it for months while looking me in the eyes, sleeping in our bed, sharing meals with our kids. You didn't just hurt me, you dismantled our family. He stepped toward her, but she raised her hand to stop him. We're done, Colin. I already spoke to a lawyer. You'll get served this week. Emily let out a gasp, and I turned to her. That goes for us, too. What? She said, her voice trembling. I filed this morning, I said. You'll get the papers Monday. No, Daniel, wait. I shook my head. I waited long enough. I listened to you lie to my face for months, all while wondering why we weren't connecting like we used to. And all along, you were giving your best to someone else. A ripple of murmurs passed through the guests. Several were already moving toward the door, quietly excusing themselves from a party that had long stopped feeling like one. Sarah turned to me. I think I'm ready to go. I nodded. Same. We walked past Emily and Colin, two people who once held so much power over us, and now stood hollow and exposed in their own home. Outside, the cool night air was a relief. Sarah exhaled slowly, visibly lighter. That felt final. It was, I said, and necessary. We stood beside our cars for a moment, unsure of how to say goodbye after such an emotionally loaded night. You didn't have to include me in this, she said, but I'm glad you did. You deserve the truth, I replied, and maybe a little bit of dignity, too. They were so careful with their lies, so confident they'd never be caught. I just wanted to give you a chance to reclaim something before the fallout hit. She smiled faintly. Well, I guess we both got closure. I nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in my chest ease. As I watched Sarah drive off into the night, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of my freedom. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No late-night pacing. No spiraling thoughts about what I might have done wrong. Just silence. Peaceful, unfamiliar silence. The next morning, I cleaned out the guest room. Packed up Emily's remaining things into boxes, stacking them neatly by the door. I didn't need reminders. Not anymore. Around noon, I got a message from one of the partners at work. Heard about last night. You okay? I replied, better than okay. Just clearing the air. He responded, well, in case it matters, you're not the only one who saw through him. There's talk about restructuring. I didn't press. I didn't need to. Colin had built his house of cards too high. And now, the wind had found it. By Monday, the papers were served. Emily came by that evening to collect her things. She didn't say much, just stood in the doorway, looking around the home we once shared like it was a museum of lost time. Daniel, she said softly, can I just say? No, I interrupted gently. I think we've said enough. She nodded, blinking back tears. I hope someday you understand what you gave up, I said. Not just me, but a version of yourself you may never get back. She didn't argue. She just walked away. On the day of the party, I arrived at Sarah's house right on time. She was dressed in black, simple, elegant, and devastatingly composed. You ready? I asked as she opened the door. Her voice was ice. Let's ruin a good evening. And with that, we drove together to the party. Not as a couple, not as victims, but as witnesses walking into a courtroom where the defendants didn't even know they were on trial. We parked, stepped out, and walked side by side to the door. The moment Emily saw us walk in together, her entire body froze. The wine glass slipped slightly in her grip. Her smile, the one she wore for everyone else, vanished before she could hide it. And Colin? Colin looked like he'd seen a ghost. That was the moment I knew. This was going to be a very different kind of evening. Silence doesn't usually fall at a party. Not in the first 10 minutes. Not when the music's still low and people are trading pleasantries over cocktails. But when Sarah and I stepped through that door, something shifted. Emily was standing near the patio entrance, dressed in that soft cream blouse I'd always loved. The same one I bought her for her birthday. Colin had just handed her a drink. He was smiling, mid-conversation, until his eyes landed on us. And then, stillness. His mouth hung slightly open. Emily turned slowly, following his gaze, and when she saw Sarah on my arm, her whole body went stiff. Her jaw tensed. Her hands trembled. 1,000 emotions cycled across her face in 5 seconds. Shock, confusion, panic, guilt. Daniel, she finally said. Just my name. Nothing else. I smiled, casual as ever. Hey, honey. I thought it'd be nice to catch up with some familiar faces. Brought Sarah along, too. You don't mind, do you? Sarah added. Hope it's not awkward. Emily and I don't really know each other, but I figured tonight's as good a time as any to change that. Colin tried to recover, but he was already flailing. Daniel, I didn't know you two, knew each other so well. Oh, we didn't, I replied coolly. Until recently. Emily stepped forward, her voice shaky. Can we talk? Privately? Of course, I said. But before we do, I just want to say one quick thing to the room. She flinched, glancing around. People were already watching, some politely pretending not to, others openly curious. I raised my glass. To honesty, I said. May it find us even when we think we're good at hiding. The toast landed like a thud. A few nervous chuckles followed. Sarah clinked her glass to mine, then took a long sip. We stepped out onto the back deck. Emily followed me, her heels clicking too fast, too loud. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. I should ask you the same. She looked around, then leaned in close. Bringing her here? Are you trying to embarrass me? No, I said. You already handled that part. I just figured it was time we all stopped pretending. Daniel, she said, pleading now. Let's not do this here. Please. We can talk at home. I'll explain everything. I looked at her for a long time. My wife. The woman I once trusted more than anyone. You don't get to ask for dignity in the middle of deceit, Emily. Her mouth opened, then closed again. You made me an extra in my own life? I continued. I thought I was out of town closing deals, trusting you to hold down the home we built. Turns out I was just giving you time to rehearse a different kind of performance. She crossed her arms, defensive. You don't understand. It wasn't just about you. Colin and I. Spare me, I said. Really, I'm not here to fight for something that was already given away. She blinked fast, as if trying to cry on command. But this time, it wasn't working. Why now, she asked. Why tonight? Because I wanted to see your face when you realized I knew. And I wanted him, I nodded back toward the living room. To realize that not every man rolls over when he's stabbed in the back. Inside, Sarah was in conversation with two of the other wives. Her tone was calm, measured, but the fury behind her eyes could have scorched the entire wine rack. Colin was circling the room like a dog looking for a door. A few of the senior partners had arrived, and he was doing his best to pretend this wasn't unraveling right in front of them. Emily followed me back inside, quieter now, diminished. Sarah caught my eye and gave the slightest nod. It was time. We stepped into the center of the room, me, standing beside Sarah, facing our respective spouses. I'm sure most of you came tonight expecting drinks, good food, and maybe some harmless office gossip. I began, my voice calm, but loud enough to cut through the background noise. Well, some gossip isn't so harmless. A hush spread like ripples across the surface of a still lake. Sarah stepped forward. I just want to say, for the record, that I never thought I'd be sharing this kind of news at a party. But since it seems some of us like secrets, maybe a little sunlight will do us all some good. She looked straight at Colin. I know. About you. About Emily. About everything. The air left the room. No gasps, no shouts, just silence. Raw and heavy. Colin's face went red, then pale. Sarah, let's talk about this at home. No, she said firmly. Let's not. Because the home you're talking about doesn't exist anymore. Emily looked ready to faint. But I wasn't done. To be honest, I said, I used to think I'd crumble if something like this ever happened. But I've realized something. I paused, scanning the room. Sometimes betrayal is just the last push we need to finally trade up. Emily turned toward me, her mouth trembling. Daniel, don't do this. Don't. I stepped back, letting the moment settle. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was truth. And in that moment, the truth stood between us all, undeniable and irreversible. There's something surreal about waking up in a house that used to feel full. The coffee pot dripped the same way it always had. The morning sun still came through the kitchen window at the exact same angle. But everything was quieter, emptier. And yet, I didn't feel alone. I felt unburdened. In the days after the party, something unexpected started happening. Messages rolled in. Quiet texts from coworkers, vague acknowledgments from acquaintances who had been at the party. A few offered support. Others danced around the subject, clearly curious but too polite to ask directly. One message stood out. It was from Sarah. Just wanted to check in. You doing okay? I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Strangely, yes. You? Strangely, yes, she echoed. We met for coffee the next Saturday. Neutral ground. No expectations. She looked different, lighter, somehow. The same woman who stood silently beside me in Colin's living room now wore her hair down, her posture relaxed. How are the kids? I asked. With their grandparents this weekend, she said. Which means I've had exactly one day to figure out who I am when I'm not playing cleanup crew for a man-child. I laughed. That's more clarity than I've found. She smiled. Give it time. We talked for 2 hours. Not about them, Emily or Colin, but about everything else. Music, books, work. It was easy, like rediscovering a forgotten part of myself. When we said goodbye, she hugged me. It wasn't romantic, just warm, real. That was the beginning of something I hadn't expected. Not love, not even friendship exactly, but understanding, mutual healing. Meanwhile, Colin's fall from grace was swift. I didn't need to lift a finger. Word had already spread about the affair, about the party, about how he'd used company trips to cover his tracks. HR quietly launched an internal audit. Rumors started flying. 3 weeks later, I heard he'd been reassigned. A polite euphemism for a forced demotion. By month's end, he was gone altogether. Emily called me the day his departure went public. I let it go to voicemail. Daniel, I didn't know it would go this far. I never meant for it to blow up like this. She still didn't get it. She thought the problem was the fallout, not the betrayal, not the choice. She called again the next day. This time, she didn't leave a message, and I didn't return the call. My lawyer had been swift and effective. By the end of the second month, our divorce was finalized. We'd split the house proceeds, though I negotiated to keep the lake cabin in my name. It had always been more mine than ours. The same week I signed the final papers, I got another message from Sarah. I'm thinking of hosting a dinner. Nothing formal. Just people who've survived things they didn't think they could. You in? I replied instantly. Absolutely. That dinner turned into a ritual every other Friday. A few mutual friends, some colleagues, even 2 other people we'd learned had been quietly dealing with their own divorces. It wasn't therapy, but it was close. Honest conversation over simple meals. No performance. No masks. At one of those dinners, after the wine had been poured and the laughter settled, Sarah leaned over and said something I'll never forget. You know, I used to think what Colin and Emily had was some twisted affair. I nodded. Wasn't it? She smiled. No, it was a transaction. A trade. They traded loyalty for attention, stability for ego. And we? I asked. We traded illusion for truth. It hit me then. The reason I wasn't bitter. I hadn't just lost a wife. I'd gained clarity. Emily had always been good at playing the part, sweet, supportive, engaging. But somewhere along the way, she stopped being present, stopped choosing us. And I ignored the signs because I wanted the image more than I wanted the reality. Now, I wanted the reality, even if it came with scars. One afternoon, about 3 months after the party, I ran into Emily at the grocery store. She looked thinner, tired, like someone still trying to make sense of the pieces she'd broken. Daniel, she said cautiously. Hey, Emily. There was an awkward pause. We both reached for the same brand of coffee. She let go. You look good, she said. Thanks. She hesitated. I heard about Colin, the job, everything. Yeah, it's been a year for surprises. She winced. I made a mistake. I didn't respond. I was stupid. I thought I was trading boredom for excitement, but it turns out excitement doesn't last. I finally looked her in the eyes. I'm sorry for how it ended, she added. But I'm not sorry it ended. I nodded. Neither am I. And with that, we walked away in opposite directions. No more bitterness. Just distance. Fall settled into the city with the kind of crisp finality that mirrored the emotional season I'd just come through. The air smelled cleaner. The trees shed what they no longer needed. I understood that now, what it meant to let go of what no longer served you. The lake cabin became my escape. The weekends I used to spend trying to reconnect with Emily now belonged to silence, long walks through pine trails, and a stubborn little wood-burning stove that always took 3 matches to light. It wasn't just a retreat. It was where I figured out who I was without her. Funny thing about starting over, it's never as dramatic as you think it'll be. No lightning bolts. No sweeping declarations. Just small decisions that slowly add up. A new morning routine, a different playlist, switching the framed photos in the hallway without thinking twice. By October, I'd moved out of the old house entirely. It sold fast, and I never looked back. Sarah and I had grown closer, but carefully. We never rushed anything. We'd both been burned in the same fire, and that kind of shared pain either builds something unshakable or reduces everything to ashes. She invited me to help with her kids' Halloween decorations one weekend. Paper ghosts and fake cobwebs, and more glitter than any sane adult should tolerate. At one point, her youngest tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Are you Mommy's new friend?" I smiled. "I think so, yeah." He nodded solemnly. "You're better than the last one. He used to smell like cologne and lies." Sarah burst out laughing so hard she nearly dropped the glue gun. It was a moment, unexpected, hilarious, deeply human. We didn't talk about dating. Not then. We didn't need to define it. It was enough to know we were showing up for each other, week after week, no secrets, no games. Meanwhile, Colin had all but vanished. He moved to a condo downtown. No more company parties. No Christmas cards. Just a name people spoke less and less until he became a cautionary tale rather than a person. Sarah had finalized their divorce with little drama. He didn't fight it. Maybe he didn't have the energy. Emily, on the other hand, was not doing as well. I'd stopped responding to her messages, but that didn't stop them from coming. Sometimes she sent long apologies. Other times, she rambled about memories, our first apartment, our anniversary trips. The nostalgia she'd once traded away so easily was now something she clung to. I never responded. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew I wasn't the man she remembered, and I no longer wanted to be. One Sunday, as I was cleaning out a box of old files, I found a letter Emily had written me years ago. I'd forgotten it existed. It was from our first anniversary, a sweet, handwritten note full of dreams about the life we were building. "You're the safest place I've ever known," she'd written. I read it once, then set it on the table. It didn't hurt, the way I thought it might. It felt distant, like reading someone else's story. That night, I burned the letter in the fireplace at the cabin. Not out of anger, but as a kind of final ritual. It was time to stop carrying things meant for a different version of me. In November, Sarah and I went hiking up near the ridge that overlooked the bay. At the top, we sat on a bench overlooking the water, sipping from thermoses like two people who had earned their peace the hard way. "I never thought I'd be here," she said, watching the sun set over the horizon. "Where's here?" "Content. Or at least getting there." I nodded. "Same." She turned to me, her eyes steady. "Do you think what they did to us broke us?" I thought about that for a long moment. "No," I said. "I think it broke the illusions we had. But us? We're still standing. Maybe even stronger." She smiled. I like that answer. We sat in silence after that. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just quiet. The kind of silence that feels earned. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily. Handwritten again. I almost threw it away unread. But something made me open it. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of a confession. A reflection. She wrote about her loneliness, about how Colin had made her feel wanted in a way she hadn't felt in years. She admitted it had been intoxicating, easy, but also shallow and short-lived. "He didn't love me," she wrote. "He loved the version of me that needed saving. And I loved the version of him that made me forget who I was becoming." She didn't ask for another chance. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just said goodbye. "I hope you're finding peace," the last line read. "And I hope one day I do too." I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and never opened it again. Thanksgiving came quickly. In years past, Emily and I had hosted. Her cooking was average, too much rosemary in everything, but she loved the pageantry of it all. Matching napkins, centerpiece candles, the works. I usually focused on the turkey and tried not to burn the rolls. This year was different. Sarah invited me to her parents' place. I hesitated at first. It felt premature, like stepping into a life that still belonged to someone else. But she insisted. "Come as a friend," she said. "No pressure. Just good food, and people who won't ask you why your marriage ended." So I went. It was warm, loud, imperfect in the best way. Her dad grilled the turkey because he hated ovens. Her mom corrected everyone's posture. The kids argued over who got the last piece of pie. It wasn't polished. It was real, and real felt better than perfect ever had. At one point during the evening, Sarah and I were alone on the back porch, our hands wrapped around mugs of cider. "I'm glad you came," she said. Me too. She paused. You know, a few months ago, I thought my life was over. I looked at her. And now I think it's just different. Smaller in some ways, but clearer. I nodded. Same here. She reached out, slid her hand into mine. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't movie scene romance. It was something better. Steady. That night, as I drove home through the winding streets, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the confrontation, the fallout, and the unexpected peace that followed. I used to think the hardest part of healing would be letting go of the anger. But that wasn't it. The hardest part was letting go of who I used to be. The man who thought loyalty could prevent heartbreak. The man who thought being good and steady and consistent was enough. It wasn't. Not for Emily. But it was enough for me. And maybe, someday, it would be enough for someone else. I still ran into people who didn't know the full story. At work events. In line at the coffee shop. They'd ask about Emily, vaguely curious. I always answered the same way. We grew apart. It was true, in a sense. We just grew in opposite directions. She towards something shallow and thrilling. Me towards something quieter, but real. Sometimes, I caught myself wondering how she was doing. Not because I missed her, but because we'd once shared so much, it was hard to imagine her completely out of the world I moved through. I didn't look her up. Didn't check her social media. Didn't ask around. Some stories didn't need epilogues. By Christmas, the cabin felt like home. I put up lights, bought a crooked little tree from a roadside lot, and spent Christmas Eve by the fire with a glass of wine and a dog-eared book. Sarah called that night, just to say Merry Christmas. I hope next year looks completely different for both of us, she said. I think it already does, I replied. She laughed. That's the best answer I've heard all week. In January, I officially started a new role at a consulting firm across town. Different industry. Same skill set. New start. No one there knew the story. They just knew I showed up on time, did my work well, and kept to myself unless the conversation turned to hiking or good scotch. There was something liberating about it. Reinventing yourself in small, quiet ways. And every once in a while, when I caught my reflection in the elevator doors or the glass of a storefront window, I saw someone I hadn't expected to see again. Me. Not the betrayed husband. Not the man in survival mode. Just me. Older. Wiser. A little more guarded. But still standing. Still open. Still whole. Life has a strange way of testing you, even after you think you've already passed the hardest exam. It was early March, gray skies lingering longer than usual, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old instincts. But something told me to answer. Hello. A pause. Then a familiar voice. Hi, Daniel. It's Sarah. Morrison. Not my Sarah. His Sarah. Colin's ex-wife. I sat down. Hey, it's been a while. Yeah, she said, her voice calm, but with an edge I couldn't quite read. I debated calling. But I felt like you should know. Know what? It's Colin. He's sick. I didn't say anything. Pancreatic cancer, she said. Stage 4. They just found it last month. Still, I was silent. He reached out to the kids, she added. Wants to make amends. Asked if I'd let him see them. I said yes. For them, not for him. But I thought you should know, in case. I don't know. Closure matters, I guess. I thanked her for telling me and hung up. Then I just sat there. Not angry. Not sad. Just unsure. That night, I told Sarah, my Sarah, about the call. She listened carefully, then asked one question. Would it help you to see him? I don't think so. She nodded. Then don't. I didn't sleep well. Not because I felt guilty, but because of something else, something I couldn't quite name at first. It took me a few days to realize what it was. I didn't want revenge anymore. That feeling had left me long ago. What lingered now was a question. If someone tries to make amends right before the end, does it count? I didn't reach out to Colin. I figured he had enough to deal with. But I did write him a letter. Short. Honest. I don't forgive what you did. But I don't hate you anymore. I hope you find peace before this ends. I never knew if he read it. 2 weeks later, Sarah Morrison texted me again. He's gone. That was it. No funeral details. No memorial. Just the final punctuation to a chapter that once threatened to rewrite my whole life. Emily reached out again shortly after. Maybe she'd heard. Maybe grief made her nostalgic. She asked if we could meet. Just coffee. Nothing dramatic. I said yes, not because I wanted to rekindle anything, but because I didn't feel the sting anymore. Curiosity without pain. Distance without malice. We met at a small cafe near the bookstore we used to frequent. She looked older. Not in a cruel way. Just real. Life-worn. "How are you?" she asked, like it wasn't the most ironic question in the world. "I'm okay," I said. "Better, actually." She nodded. "I believe you." We talked for 20 minutes. She told me she was working again, part-time at a nonprofit, living in a smaller apartment. "It's quieter," she said. "Lonelier sometimes. But honest." I didn't ask if she missed me. She didn't offer. Before she left, she said something that stuck with me. "I used to think losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But I think what really broke me was realizing I never deserved to keep you in the first place." There was no bitterness in her voice. Just truth. We said goodbye without promises or regrets. Just two people who once shared a life, now walking very different paths. Spring came early that year. The cabin bloomed. Wildflowers pushing through soil that had once been frozen. I spent my weekends outside more, trimming, planting, building a new fence that didn't really need building, but gave me something to focus on. Sarah visited often, sometimes with her kids, sometimes alone. One night, as we sat by the fire pit, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about starting over? Like, really starting over?" I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "Yeah, I do." Because for the first time, I actually meant it. By the time summer returned, the cabin didn't feel like a retreat anymore. It felt like the center of something new. Sarah and I never labeled what we were doing. There was no talk about being official, no checklist of milestones. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing up every day without needing to be rescued or chased or fixed. She came over one Sunday afternoon with a picnic basket and a book of poetry. Her kids were with their grandparents, and we sat by the lake, trading pages and long silences. At one point, she closed her book and looked out across the water. "You know what I've realized?" she said. "We didn't trade down. We didn't lose. We just got traded up into the life we were actually supposed to have." I smiled. That makes two of us. It's strange, the peace that comes when you stop rehearsing the past. There was a time I couldn't tell the story without my jaw tightening, without my stomach turning at the thought of Emily and Colin. What they did, how easily they did it. Now, it feels like someone else's storm. One I passed through, but no longer carry. I learned how to cook for one without feeling lonely. Then I learned how to cook for two again, this time with someone who actually joins me in the kitchen, barefoot and laughing while the garlic burns. I stopped checking my phone for old numbers. Stopped rereading texts I never answered. Stopped asking why about people who made their choices long before I knew I had any of my own to make. One night, late in July, Sarah and I sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees. "You ever think about how it all started?" she asked. "You mean, the party?" She nodded. That moment they realized we knew. I exhaled, remembering the stunned silence, the panic in their eyes. "I used to think that was the worst night of my life," I said. "Now I think it was the night I finally woke up." Sarah smiled, then leaned her head against my shoulder. "I'm glad you did." I wrapped my arm around her, letting the quiet stretch between us like a soft blanket. No more pretense. No more pretending to be okay. We were okay, just not in the way we thought we'd be. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. It was a legal notice. The last tie to the house Emily and I once owned had officially dissolved. Paperwork, final and dull, like most endings. I signed the forms and walked down to the dock with a cold drink in hand. Looking out over the water, I thought about everything that had happened. About the version of me who had once walked into that party, gripping Sarah Morrison's hand, prepared to burn down the life he thought he'd built. That version of me had been scared, righteous, hurt, but he'd also been brave enough to let go. And that made all the difference. So yes, when I arrived at the party with my wife's lover's wife, it shocked everyone. It shattered illusions. It turned a quiet betrayal into a very public reckoning. But looking back now, it wasn't revenge. It was liberation. Because what I got in return, peace, honesty, real companionship, was the kind of trade no one sees coming. And it was the best deal I ever made.